Please welcome Professor Donna Fields, project-based learning expert and creator of scaffoldingmagic.com. She will be discussing how projects can help make sure we include critical thinking, higher order level thinking questions, the growth mindset, and stronger student agency in class activities.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. I love working with Richmond. They're always looking for ways to help our students move forward and to learn in the best and most effective way possible. So today I'm here to talk about taking advantage of project-based elements to enhance learning. Sounds really big, no? But we're going to structure it so that it's very understandable, and I'm going to try to convince you the projects are really the most effective way for our students to be learning. We have 3 different objectives today. The first one is to identify 21st century skills. Why? Because that's what our students are facing, and that's why they're in school, to be able to be viable in the world that it's around them. We need to distinguish how these 21st century skills can be developed through projects. And these projects are going to develop globalization, environmental awareness, student agency. We want to make sure that the students are centered in the learning and to think critically. So first, we're going to start talking about identifying 21st century skills. Why is this important? There's a 3rd industrial revolution that we're in, and we need to address it effectively. I always like to start with sort of an inspirational message, and in this case it is, a boat is always safer at port, but that isn't what it was built for. Well, we can interpret it this different ways. My interpretation of it is that the education we need to move forward, it's safer just to keep teaching and for our students to be learning the same way they always have. But it's not effective. It's effective for only certain types of learners. And we want all of our students to feel that they are being seen in the classroom. So how can we address this and how can we move forward? Well, the first thing we need to do is how we learn language. We need to look at this. And most of you are experts in the educational world, but let's just go over some points and so that we're all on the same page here. What does this number mean? 13,797. Well, it is in fact the number of hours it takes us to learn our home language. How is that possible? Taking away sleep, although even in sleep we learn, language acquisition happens by the time even before we're 1 month old. But let's start at 1 month. We can start distinguishing between speech sounds, most human babies. And most human babies at 6 months can begin babbling, they can begin producing speech. And if we teach them sign language, that's another way that they can communicate from 6 months onwards. From 12 to 18 months, they can produce holophrases. And those with children, you'll know those holophrases are very powerful. They're one-word sentences that really show what they need, what they're looking for. And then from 3 to 5 years, we have most human children will have what resembles adult speech. What does this mean? By the time a child is 6 years and 4 months old, that child will have a really strong basis of their home language. Now, why is that important to us if we don't have those students then? We need to remind not just our students, but ourselves that it took us 13,797 hours to learn our home language. We usually do not have that much time in the classroom. The other thing here is that we learned these 13,797 hours through holistic means. We learned it by playing with our friends. We learned it by going shopping. We learned it by watching TV and movies with our families. We learned it by having meals with our neighbors, with our extended family. We don't usually have that in the classroom, and that's something that we can change. This is something that projects can help us simulate. OECD is the most important source for educators these days, and they are supporting the fact that we need to make changes in our perspective on how we present material to our students and what we're doing to ask them to learn. The OECD, and there's a lot of information that's very easy to find and very important, it says that our students need to create new values. It says that our students need to reconcile, they need to learn to reconcile tensions and dilemmas. Our students are more agitated than ever for some reason. And that's a whole other talk. They need to take responsibility for their own actions. They need to learn this. They're not learning it outside of school. We need to make it part of our curriculum, because by the year 2030, the well-being of society needs to be a shared destination, or we're going to implode or explode, one of the two. And we don't want to do either of those. So we can go to the OECD and we can learn, we can read the report. What students learn matters. We can find out what they want from their future. We can use different teaching frameworks and how we can use the curriculum. And most importantly, at least for me, there is an excellent report on student agency and how we can augment student agency in our lessons. Most importantly, by helping our students become more independent, by helping them have more of a voice in their own learning. And how do we do that? Well, we need to give them a voice, and not only give them a voice, but we need to give them the opportunity to learn how to use that voice. So not like this. We need to be, for instance, conductors and help our students learn to express themselves more appropriately, but learn how to negotiate, learn how to express themselves in responsible ways. And if they're sitting in a classroom with books in front of them all day, they don't have this opportunity. This is what we will usually see in movies and the TV. When we walk into most classrooms, we look at this and think, this is a well-constructed classroom. The students are all neat at their own desks. They seem to be smiling. If they're raising their hands, that means they're engaged. What we really are seeing, though, are students who are passively learning. If they're raising their hands, then they've been taught that someone needs to give them permission to speak. They don't decide themselves when it's appropriate. They are counting on someone else to tell them. That may be a perfect way to control students in a classroom, but that is not the way we want to help them develop as human beings. A lot of them will learn by reading these textbooks. We can see on standardized tests that many of the students learn. They're not learning 21st century skills, however. And we are also missing the students with different types of learning styles. So we want to try to address this. Obviously, since I'm here, I believe projects is the answer. But I need to show you a lot more information before I can convince you of this. World Economic Forum is one of the lead researchers on what is the top skills for employability. Here are 10 of them for 2020. I know we're already in 2021, so I'm going to address 5 years from now, but this is what they still feel is viable. Complex problem solving, critical thinking. Students need to be creative in their future. They need to manage people, coordinate with others. They need to have emotional intelligence, judgment and decision-making, service orientation, negotiation, and cognitive flexibility. By 2025, the World Economic Forum has taken into account what's been happening since March, during the pandemic. It's only increased our dependency on technology. What does that mean? It means that 85 million jobs will probably be displaced from humans to machines in less than 5 years. This means that critical thinking and problem solving top the list of skills that will grow in the next 5 years. Why? Because technology can't do that. The newly emerging skills that we need to make sure our students have are active learning, resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. And these are all issues that during the pandemic were more evident than ever that our students didn't have, and adults either. We needed to really develop those skills. There was a report done by a professor at the University of Tokyo, Noriko Arai, and she said that the globalization and technology have dramatically changed how students learn and what they will need to learn in order to thrive in tomorrow's world. Well, she has taken into account the third industrial revolution, and that has to do with technology taking over millions and millions of what used to be just blue-collar worker jobs. Now technology is moving up the scale and is able to do higher order thinking types of work. So Noriko Arai took this very seriously, and she and her team started doing a study between humans, students, and machines. And what they assumed was questions given to machines, lower order questions, lower order thinking questions, would be easily answered by machines more effectively. What they were horrified to find was even higher order questions with even simple inferencing jumps. The machines also did better than humans. Now I'm going to show you an example of one of the fairly easy questions that they asked. Buddhism spread mainly to Southeast Asia and East Asia, blah, blah, blah. If you can read this, you will see that choose the most appropriate answer from the given choices. Blank has spread to Oceania. A simple inferencing jump, all you need to take out the countries, the continent Europe, North and South America, and you'll see that Christianity has spread to Oceania. However, what was horrifying to the team was that 40% of 12-year-olds got this answer incorrect. 50% of 13-year-olds were incorrect, and 33% of 14-year-olds were not able to answer that question. So her team sort of has proved that what we need to do in the classroom is really essential. She says, it's essential that we take the steps to make sure our students are more intelligent than artificial intelligence. Although I think what she also really means is that they need to be more qualified, not just more intelligent. So this is another reason, if you take into account this whole study, why these 10 factors that the World Economic Forum feels so strongly about we develop in the classroom are addressed in this, and we need to do this, and we can do this through project-based learning. So are you with me? Are you getting a little more convinced that this is essential? Here we're just developing a little more of the skills the World Economic Forum has felt are so important to develop. We can do these through projects. Collaboration, these are not skills that we usually can ask students to develop when they're sitting looking at a book and answering exercises. They need to do complex problem solving through community issues. We also want them to make sure they're expanding from their local communities into the national and to the global perspective communities. We need them to be sure that they are creative and that they have room to be innovative. We want to give them opportunities to be flexible cognitively so that they don't just research, but they know how to deepen their learning through various ways. We want to make sure that our students are able to negotiate, that they find their voice and learn to navigate between different agendas, not just their own, but the people they're looking at. We need to be sure our students are able to manage people. With this generation, they're looking at phones and looking at computers all day. We need them to be able to look at humans and know how to appropriately negotiate and navigate between whoever they need to work with. We need to make sure that we're giving them critical thinking skills. They need to look at problems and look at from different perspectives and different angles and come up with different solutions, not just what they think is the correct solution in a book and the answer in the back of it. We need them to be able to coordinate with others. They need to manage obstacles more effectively and organize not only their agendas, but other people's agendas. What else? The last two, emotional intelligence, again, we're saying, technology for the time being doesn't have emotional intelligence. And this is one of the things as humans that we can do better than technology, but they need to be appropriate and they need to have developed skills in emotional intelligence. We don't want our students to be crying all day or screaming or whatever is not appropriate. Service orientation, again, we want them to have a global perspective, but we also want them to look at their community. How can they make a difference? We have students that feel that they don't mean anything, that they've been isolated for the past year. We want them to think about how they can be connected to their community, again, on a local, national, and global level. And that's what projects will really give them a chance to see, change their perspective. One other thing that's very important for us to do is to help our students have a growth mindset. And here's a table that I've developed that has growth mindset statements in it. And I give this to teachers so that they give it to their students. What happens is that the teachers need it almost more than the students. If they begin to believe it, they can encourage their students to believe it. So the way this works is that 5 minutes before you begin any curriculum and of any lesson, When a student, you can have students repeat this every day. And when they say, I can't do it, you can encourage them to say, you try thinking, what am I missing? If the students, if their first tendency say, I give up, you want them to say, I'll use another strategy. If the students usually say, it's good enough, I'm going to hand it in now, you want them to try to say, is this really my best work? Maybe I can do it better. If the student's tendency is say, I can't do it any better, you can ask them to say, I can always improve. If the student's tendency is to say, it's too difficult, I'm never going to learn it, what we can try to get them to think is, I can do it if I keep trying. This is all growth mindset, but it takes a lot of practice. If the student says, I made a mistake, I'm never going to be able to get it right, mistakes help me learn. And this is something as teachers we need to encourage. There is a study in Japan where the teachers they actually celebrate mistakes, and the students are much better at accepting any mistakes they make because they know that that helps their classmates. They have to explain how they made the mistake, and then their classmates help them correct it. This is a whole classroom environment issue. If the student keeps saying, I can't do this, the teacher herself or himself can tell them, I can't do this yet. This word yet is one of the most powerful words we have in the English language, in any language, in Spanish, in Czech, in Russian, in anything. There's actually a song in Sesame Street about the word yet, and it's trying to help students understand, help the children understand that they may not be able to do it now, but with dedication, they will be able to. A couple of more. If a student says, I'm never going to be smart enough, which is what they may hear at home, you tell them if you keep studying until you know how to do it. And dedication is a huge factor in the growth mindset. Everyone else can do it and I can't. You get them to try to think, I learned from my classmates. If they found a way, I can find a way. And then the last thing, for the time being, if plan A didn't work, then I'll try plan B. So this is a table you can introduce in your classroom, and this will help change the whole perspective of how children learn and how they feel they can learn. So the other thing we want to really take into account for project-based learning is higher order thinking. One reason teachers feel a little nervous about moving into project-based learning is because the assessment is not so obvious. There are a lot of ifs. And that's because in projects, we push our students towards higher order thinking questions. Does that mean we shouldn't do it? No, because if we keep our students in the lower order thinking questions, they will be able to do exactly what machines do, but not well enough. Machines will always be able to be more effective in lower order thinking questions. The studies show, and I'm going to give an example of lower and higher order thinking so that it's a lot clearer. But the studies show that on average, 80% of the questions we ask in class are lower order thinking questions. And that's an average, which means that some of us ask only lower order thinking questions. What we need to do is push our students up to higher order thinking questions, so that they develop their critical thinking skills, but only if they have the opportunity. So I'm going to give you an example of a very simple topic. How, why, and what if are the most powerful questions. I'm going to show you why this is. All right. So this is a question continuum. It's similar to Bloom's taxonomy, which you're probably familiar with, but it's just a little bit different. It shows that the first word we use will change the whole perspective and sophistication, complexity of the answer we need to expect. So let's take a topic that all of our students will eventually have to study, the water cycle, and most of our students have to study it pretty much every year. So let's start with the lowest of lower order thinking questions, a yes or no. If we ask our students, do you know the different stages of the water cycle? All they have to answer is yes or no. Very simple. Maybe important, maybe not. Let's go to the word who. If we ask the question, who needs to know about the water cycle? Even though it's a lower order thinking question, it's actually kind of interesting. Do I need to know it? Do my parents need to know it? Do my sisters and brothers? And you have to sort of start justifying already. So let's move up the question continuum and use the word where. If we ask them the question, where can we find reliable information about the water cycle and its importance in our lives? Now, this is very interesting. It's right in the middle. But first of all, there's an insinuation that there's unreliable information, which is very important for our students to know. And we're also making this personal. It's not just an abstract concept of the water cycle. Why is it important in my life? Now I might want to know about the water cycle. So let's go to what. And if we ask them the question, what parts of the water cycle have become at risk because of global pollution? Well, now we actually have the information from the previous questions embedded in this. They have to know those lower order questions to answer this. And we're also expanding into the global perspective. So let's keep pushing up. What about how? If we ask the question, how does the water cycle represent the interdependence of the planet between humans and other living beings? Now, come on, this is getting interesting. It reminds us that the water cycle has to do with the whole planet, and humans are not the only living beings being on the planet, and we need to respect all living beings. So we're going to skip over why, and we're going to go to just what if, and this is the most powerful one, you'll see. What if you could create an international law that would guarantee a healthy future for the water cycle? What law would you create? Now, this might be really interesting for students because it gives them inherently a feeling of power. It puts it on an international scale. It shows them that they can now have an effect in the world, at least for the moment, theoretically, but puts them in the position of having a voice in the world. And this is what we want to give them. Why do we not do this more often? Again, a lot of it is because there's more uncertainty. The assessment for this question is a little more complicated, but we're going to address that as well. All right, so creating projects. Let's just say that we're going to start a project on anti-racism. The book we're using doesn't have a project already embedded, so we're going to create it ourselves. This is not going to be so difficult because I'm going to give you all the tools. We're going to start with a rubric. Now, this is a rubric that I've created over the years, and it has all of the essential elements plus room to put a few extras that are really exciting, and that's also for a whole nother talk. We have an inquiry question. We have a content objectives, language objectives, final task, formative and summative assessments. Now, if I forget to see this later, it's essential that we include language objectives. Why? Content objectives are easy. They come right from the book, the content of what we want to talk about. But language objectives, we usually do not add. And we ask our students, often we say, can you please talk about the subject? And yet we don't make the language objectives, we don't make the terms as visible as they need to be. So if we write down the language objectives into the rubric, we remember to use that language more frequently. We remember to ask our students to use it more frequently, and we make it more visible to them, hopefully. So this is a simple rubric that all we need to do is fill in with the contents of our book. But there are different elements. What in the world, for instance, is an inquiry question? In this case, I put, what if we could abolish racism on the planet? How would the world look? Okay, so this rubric, I'm going to go into every element, but I want you to see that in this rubric, we are addressing all the World Economic Forum. We're addressing all of them. So this rubric also, I want to point out, addresses all of the most important employability skills. How did we get here? Let's go through a couple of the elements. So we're going to start with the inquiry question. Now, inquiry questions, even if you only begin with inquiry questions, you want to make, they'll get your students excited. They engage the students' curiosity. They have more than one possible answer. They need to be thought-provoking and invite our students to think and reflect. They need to be relevant to our students and include the word I whenever possible. We want to really pull them in, and they need to be connected to the real world. Otherwise, students see what they're doing in the classroom and when they leave as two separate entities, and we want to fuse them a little more. So What in the world are inquiry questions? I'm going to answer that by showing you how we give, for instance, summative assessments without an inquiry question and with inquiry questions. So without, let's say we're starting a unit on the Earth in geography. What we usually do, we ask students to read pages 53 to 72 of your student book and make a list of the main characteristics of the Earth. That's what we know they need to learn. What if we change the perspective a little? And we had a little fun with this. So what if we asked them, this is an inquiry question, what if there were a galactic war between superheroines and superheroes, causing the Earth to tilt further towards or away from the sun? How would the characteristics of the Earth be affected? Now, they have to do exactly what we were going to do before, read those pages and list the characteristics of the Earth. But if you present this question to them and this picture, they're going to be a lot more excited about it and not realize that what they're doing really is just listing the characteristics of the Earth. What's another example? Something we can do, this is no inquiry question. We're working on social sciences. And we say the exam on ancient civilizations will consist of 50 questions. The timelines of each civilization you can read in pages 102 to 135. Now watch how this changes by using an inquiry question. Same topic, but what we're going to do is ask them, if you and your team had 60 seconds to explain the timeline of history from prehistory to present, how would you prepare? Now that's kind of interesting, isn't it? All right, I'm going to give you a couple of more. This is no inquiry question on the Industrial Revolution. And this one is simply asking the students to write an essay, 1,000 to 1,500 words, explaining the Industrial Revolution. Let's make it a lot more exciting for them. How could a puppet show make the Industrial Revolution more personal and relevant for you? Right? So the inquiry question is really just to draw the students in. It's the same information they need to know anyway, but it gets them more excited and they feel a little more personally involved. So if you remember, here we have the anti-racism, and the inquiry question was, what if we could abolish racism on the planet? How would the world look? Now, this is kind of intriguing for students. The content objectives I've taken right from the book. The language objectives, again, very important to make sure that I am extracting the language that they'll need to know so that I can make it more visible to them and they'll use it more and I will use it more. The final task in this case is going to be a video newspaper. Now, what other final tasks could we use? There's so many different possibilities, and this is where the fun of the final project really comes in. We could, for instance, ask them to do a graphic novel. This is one graphic novel that a class did. And another final task you can do would be in a physics class. These are students, it was called the two-sided mask, and the students had to write on one side their personality, how social media saw them, how their family saw them. And on the other side, they chose the periodic element that they felt most represented them. So that was their final task, the masks. Here's for a primary class, and they were studying cave paintings. And the final task was answering the question, what makes us human? Or what makes us different from other animals, which is even more interesting. And they drew cave paintings on their wall. And they gave tours of the cave paintings and explained it to their community. In this case, it was an economics class, and they worked with the technology teacher, and they put economic concepts in their own words in a book. On one page in their own words, on the second page, they found news, real life stories about that economic concept. So that was their final topic. It was a book. Another one here is a debate between mathematicians, and each of these students represented a different mathematician all through history, and they had to explain how that mathematician changed the world and how the world would be different if they hadn't lived and they hadn't been able to develop their skills. This is another final project, making a rock wall, and these students were studying about health, and they had to do a food plan and a health plan for everyone in their school. There are two more that I thought you'd be interested in. This one, the class was studying buoyancy, and the final project was building a boat and sailing it, seeing if it was actually buoyant. This is a final project these students did. And here we have a final project, which is a podcast, and they were answering the question, how does immigration affect us? in the past, in the present, how might it affect us in the future? What if we had to immigrate forcibly or voluntarily? And they did a podcast in their school and in the local community. So these are ideas that you can use for final projects in projects your teachers might. But again, when we present this rubric, we want to give our student a voice. Now, we don't want to have them yell and scream. We want to help them negotiate. We want to give them an opportunity to include their voices in this project. So they might say, we're not crazy about the inquiry question, or they might say there's too much content involved. They might say the language objectives, I'm really not sure how to express this. Can we add more objectives in? They probably won't really focus on the content and language. What they mostly are going to focus on is the final task, the formative and summative assessments. So they might say the final task is too complicated, or what if our team would like to add in? They might say there's not enough formative assessments. I think that we need to be judged on this task, or I think that this skill needs to be judged. And the summative assessment is usually the biggest. We don't want final exams. Now, they might have to have that final exam in the end, but maybe you can balance it and give it a different percentage. And so after the students have respectfully, and you need to make sure those rules are really solid, have they respectfully expressed themselves, then you might want to change the rubric. But now you have a team, you have a community in your classroom. You're not a dictator telling them what they have to do. You're showing students how they are part of a community in a responsible way. And this is one of the beautiful parts of projects. So if you don't want to create your own project, you can always use Richmond books. We have Compass books also, which are all oriented towards projects. We can also use the Open Day or Now You. So I'm going to show you this. In both of these, at every 2 units, there's a project. And all you need to do is go through the units, and the teacher's book has details about how you can present the project successfully and help the students develop all the different elements of it. It's the same in Now You. After every 2 units, there's a project. And in the student book, there's an explanation. In the teacher's book, it goes into depth. And it's actually one of these 2 books. I've read the teacher's books, and the first time that I could actually understand what was being said, it's written in big letters instead of the tiniest font you can possibly see. So anyway, I do recommend these, and I'm not here to sell the Richmond books, but I am here to show you how easy these projects can be developed in the classroom if you're using these. So let's just say you're using the Open Day book. Now, usually the teachers would go to Unit 4, for instance, and go from page to page. And these are really interesting activities. The exercises are very well done. There's a fluidity throughout the chapter. Every chapter, every 2 chapters ends with a project, which most teachers, for some reason, are not using. Why? Because most teachers will say, well, I've done all the exercises. The students have learned all the material. Why do I need to take the time to do the project also? It takes too much time. There's going to be chaos. The students aren't sitting in their seats. I just don't think I need to do this. They feel that if they take the time to do the projects, they're not going to be able to finish the rest of the curriculum. So they don't. And it's to the detriment of the students. Why? Because what we want our students to learn all this information. We want them to assimilate new language, but then we want them to process it. We want them to use it in a higher order thinking perspective. Most of these projects have community focus, and that's what we want our students to do. So the teachers could actually just mix up the pages and approach it, and not just page by page, but go from what they think is more interesting to the students depending on the day. But we really want them to focus on the project. And in these projects are all of the skills that the World Economic Forum has said are so important for our students to learn. When it says read, notice, answer There are lower order thinking questions that start the project so that we are sure that they've assimilated the knowledge in the first part of the unit. But then it asks them to create plans, create. It asks them to work with their groups, collaborate. It asks them to discuss questions, critical thinking, and negotiating. It asks them different options. So we're pushing them into higher order thinking skills. Again, teachers are a little nervous because this is not one correct answer. There are many correct answers. And yet, it's so important for our students to have the opportunity to do. Now, luckily, in secondary, we have the same options. We have the same opportunity to create these projects already done for us. Let's just say we're using the Now You student book. At the end of every 2 units, there's a project. And all of these projects address, believe it or not, the 10 skills the World Economic Forum feels so strongly that we develop in the classroom, the social skills. So there's always discussion, there's always collaboration, there's room for creativity. The students need to learn to work together. They need to balance different agendas, just as we were saying before. Our students need to develop these skills, and they're able to, while they're learning and working on community skills, developing their student agency. These projects are powerful. So whether you're going to develop projects yourselves using the rubric I just showed you, for instance, which can expand and include many other elements if needed, or using the books that Richmond can provide, for instance, that already have the projects thought out and developed, the most important factor here is that we begin with projects. There are resources that I strongly recommend that you check out. Becoming a High Expectation Teacher is one of the books that I feel every educator needs to read. High expectation teaching means believing our students can do projects, believing we can do projects. And it has to do with the growth mentality as well. We have the Growth Mindset book by Carol Dweck and many other factors. I also am going to include some other resources you can find on the internet that might interest you. But on the whole, I just want to thank you so much for being open to considering different ideas and ways we can help our students. We're all here in the end goal to help our students become more viable in the future and help save the planet, right? So I wanted to thank you very much. And please let me know if there's anything more that I can facilitate to convince you to move into project-based learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Fields, for a very inspiring session. We now invite you all to go back to the auditorium for today's closing plenary.
So many people are talking about project-based learning now. Especially with all the time online, we've realized that one of the only ways to really engage our students is through projects, helping them become more independent and responsible for their own learning. And yet Finland has gone one step further. They are talking about phenomenon-based learning projects. Countries all over Europe and all over the world are also opting for phenomenon-based learning. What is it and what's the difference? Well, one way I can explain it to you is that phenomenon-based learning projects use questions like, what if? So, what if you were invited to a romantic weekend in the Greek islands? How could one object your partner brings ruin not just the weekend, but the entire relationship? Okay, this is not a question we would ask our students, but it does intrigue you, doesn't it? That's what phenomenon-based learning projects do. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. A phenomenon is a topic, event, or fact of scientific interest, or a geographical feature, an historical event, or a notable person. Which do you think it is, A or B? Actually, it's both. A phenomenon could be any of these things, but it needs to be something that will really pull our students in, not only help them become engaged in research, but see the world in a different way. So what is the difference between a project and a phenomenon-based learning project? Well, a phenomenon-based learning project is a project with sparkles. A phenomenon-based learning project involves students working together to study a real-life event using a structure that includes the following. Now, there are a lot of things that are going to pop up on the screen, and they're all involved with a true phenomenon-based learning project. It took me a long time to pull these together because there's no one book that really addresses all of these. But I've put this together into one structure that's going to make a lot of sense to you in a very brief time. We're going to focus just on these 5 elements of phenomenon-based learning projects, because if you can include these 5 elements in your curriculum, you've got an amazing project. So step 1 is the inquiry question. We want to grab the student's attention. In this case, we're going to take cyberbullies. What if victims of cyberbullies were given the opportunity to confront their abusers? Now, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? So what we do now is we put this inquiry question into a rubric. So we have the inquiry question at the top of the rubric. Then we have to think of how we want our students to make the information visible that they find. So why don't we say you're a school counselor and you need to give your students advice on cyberbullying. How can you help the victims confront their abusers and then take back their power? Then we go to the final task. Now we need to put everything we can think of into this final task, all the criteria. We have in our mind what we want, but we need to express that to our students. Then we want to put informative and summative assessments. We need to know every day how they're doing. We also want to use thinking frameworks. These are brilliant in asking the students to reflect on their own learning. We ask them questions before they begin the project, we ask them while they're doing the project, and we ask them at the end of it. This helps them not only retain the content more, but it helps them figure out how they learn best, what they liked most about working on a project, what was most challenging, and how they solve problems. These are really important skills for our students. Then we want to group assess. We assess them ourselves. We have formative assessments. We have summative assessments. We also want them to assess each other. Teachers find that some of the best feedback comes from students' conversations with each other. There are going to be times during the project when you realize that the students are a little lost. All of them have the same doubts about the same content or about the same academic language. So we need to introduce mini lessons at these times. Mini lessons is something I've developed to sort of consolidate putting scaffolding into the project, doing some direct teaching, which means making sure that all of your students have the same information at the same time in the same way, and then a formative assessment in this mini lesson. We need to make sure that the students got what we were hoping they would get. Phenomenon-based learning, it's essential that the students publicly present. In a phenomenon-based learning project, the whole group goes up. They support each other, they present their projects, and they ask a lot of questions to their classmates. The classmates also are required to ask them questions. The last really important element of phenomenon-based learning that's different from just a project is the last part, reflection on learning. We want our students, again, to reflect not just on the content, but how they've learned the content. This shows critical thinking, empathy, self-awareness, student agency. These are all really critical things and exciting elements that we can help them develop in phenomenon-based learning. So, should we go back to this question? Are you dying to know what the answer is? This happens to be a true story. Someone I know who was invited to a romantic weekend in the Greek island. She had one idea and her partner had another idea. He brought an iron. To her, that was pretty much a deal breaker. The whole idea is the question was supposed to bring you in and get you curious about the information. Hopefully it did. So, again, phenomenon-based learning is not just a project, it's a project with sparkles to excite you and your students and get you really thinking.